Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Thursday Night Football showdown slate between the Minnesota Vikings and the Pittsburgh Steelers, which should actually be a pretty decent game for fantasy. Several good options here, like Justin Jefferson, who's an absolute star, Najee Harris, Muth, Deontay Johnson, and a few other guys to talk about. So it should be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are as well. I think anything will beat the New England Patriots and Buffalo Bills game, where just the Patriots threw the ball 3 times. So this should be better. I know it's fun to have fun weather, but I do enjoy high-scoring football games in a dome. Although I'm not sure it's going to be a high-scoring game, but there should be some points scored for sure. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, go ahead and fish member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Don't just cover NFL, but the NBA, NASCAR, and the MLB once those seasons start back up again. But ownership projections, optimizers, which I use to build 150 lineups on Showdown site. So if you think that's interesting, come and check it out. I think you'll enjoy the extra content over there. I do put a lot of work into it. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 mass contests, or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you sign over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus as an instant deposit match up to $100, which is free money. Want to use it to your advantage? When you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And typically, I always say I love the quarterbacks. They're fine flex plays, and I'll even put them in the captain spot, even more so if they have rushing upside. Well, both these quarterbacks have absolutely zero rushing upside. Big Ben is just the most unathletic quarterback in the NFL right now currently. I'm not sure I can think of another one right off the top of my head. Kirk Cousins. I mean, he's a fine NFL quarterback, and he does have some pretty good fantasy games time to time, but he's not that exciting of a player. Also, I will say there's so many good skill position players on this slate. Once you start rostering them, it's really hard to fit in a quarterback. Like, these guys don't really have super high ceilings. This might be one of the slates I am the lowest on the quarterbacks in the captain spot, because just looking at the skill position players, I'll read down the list here. You have Justin Jefferson, $11,000. Dalvin Cook, who is now considered likely to play, $10,800. Deontay Johnson, $10,200. Najee Harris, $10,000. Even Alexander Madison is $9,800. Then you have Claypool, $7,400. Then Freiermuth at $6,600. So once you start rostering those guys who, I mean, I have projected better than the quarterbacks, not all of those guys, but a decent chunk of them. It's like I can't really find the money to fit in these QBs. And yeah, I mean, they're fine plays. And if you roster a guy like Justin Jefferson in the captain spot, it would make sense to want to have Kirk Cousins, which I think in tournaments you should correlate that. But, like, yeah, Kirk Cousins might get you 14 points. Meanwhile, a guy like Najee Harris could get you 22. Deontay Johnson could easily outscore Kirk Cousins. So it's a weird predicament on this slate because both these quarterbacks are, I mean, and they're okay. I mean, Big Ben's not really okay. He's kind of terrible now. He's one of the worst quarterbacks in football. But for DFS purposes, I mean, at $9,000 for a quarterback, that's fine on a showdown slate. He'll pop up a little bit because point per dollar wise, he's not going to project that poorly. It just, when it comes to the raw projections, these guys are behind guys like Deontay, not Dalvin Cook, but Najee Harris and Justin Jefferson on this slate. So you're going to have to like force them in a little bit. I mean, just looking at matchups here, the Steelers are 20-50 versus the pass, but kind of flip-flop where they're stingy in terms of fantasy points allowed per game in the quarterback position, and the Vikings are kind of the complete opposite, where they're better DVOA-wise, but they're worse fantasy points allowed per game in the quarterback position. Like, these guys are fine, boring flex plays, but as far as the captain spot goes, I am not super interested. Although, if you do put these guys in the captain spot, which you might want like 5% max, make sure you pair up some pass catching options with them, because they're not going to get there by themselves. Like, Big Ben's not going to come out, have 9 carries, 79 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Like, he's going to have a guy like Deontay or Muth or whoever it may be go off as well. So make sure you correlate your lineups just to make sure they have a chance tonight. And instead of heading to our lineup, we're just going to keep talking about running backs. I'm not sure if I'm going to plug a quarterback in. I probably end up will, just for correlation's sake, if I happen to go Jefferson in the captain spot. But we'll start with running backs here first. And we'll start with the Minnesota Vikings. We have Dalvin Cook at $10,800. Alexander Madison at $9,800, which they priced both these guys where if one of them was out, I mean, they're just fairly priced. Because if they had Madison at like $3,700 and Cook happened to be out, I mean, yeah, it's just major chalk on a slate like this where he'd be like 90% owned. But that is not looking like the case because DraftKings priced these guys up, and Dalvin Cook is expected to play, at least considered likely to play, which kind of muddies the waters a bit because whenever Dalvin Cook is out, Madison just gets a full workload. He's typically very good for DFS purposes, got 20-plus touches in those 3 starts this year, and I believe 20-plus points in both of those starts as well. But with Dalvin Cook likely to play and it being a shorter injury, you have to assume he's going to get pretty much a full-on workload, because if he wasn't ready, especially on a Thursday night quick turnaround, you had to expect that he'd be just be sitting in this game because Madison can definitely fill in quite nicely for Dalvin Cook. So you have to assume pretty much a full workload here. I still think we're going to see some Madison, but probably not enough for him to pay off at nearly $10,000. So I'd much rather be inclined to play Dalvin Cook here. Although I will say there's other really good plays on this slate that are expensive, similar to Dalvin Cook. So I don't think you absolutely have to play him, but I think he's an option nonetheless. Probably a better tournament play than a cash play. And the Steelers this season are 24th DV versus the run, although I will say they're kind of stingy at fantasy points allowed per game, being second. So kind of weird, like some of the quarterbacks where the Steelers are pretty low in the totem pool in terms of DVOA, but in fantasy points allowed per game, they are quite stingy. But Dalvin Cook, elite volume, close to 20 carries per game and 4 targets. Hard to pass it up, especially a guy as talented as him. And they're playing at home, higher implied team total, and they're 3.5-point favorites. If he gets into the end zone and has a good day yardage-wise, he'll be a fine play at nearly $11,000. Although I do worry that we see more Madison than we'd like, especially at $11,000 for Cook. As far as the Steelers go, it's basically Najee Harris and everybody else. Yeah, you could look at Benny Snell and maybe Kalen Ballage if you want, but these guys just don't get significant enough touches to pay off their salaries, even though they're like low. But Benny Snell's $1,000, and unless he just happens to vulture a touchdown for some reason, although I'm not sure why they do that because Najee Harris is definitely a goal line back. He's huge, so I just don't really see myself playing into the backup running backs. Maybe besides like 150 lineups and maybe you throw a sprinkle of those guys in. But Najee Harris, he's not efficient, and it's hard to be behind that terrible offensive line, but he just gets so many touches. Like he's averaging around 6 targets per game, averaging close to 20 carries per game. It's just hard to pass it up because you're going to get typically 25 plus touches every single week from Najee Harris. And a large chunk of that is in the passing game, which just gives him a super nice floor in PPR scoring sites like DraftKings. Again, efficiency is a bit of an issue, but this is a good matchup versus Minnesota's running back. They're 29th DV versus the run and 27th versus running backs. So Angie Harris, one of my more favorite plays, I would say, on this slate. Now, he doesn't have to score a touchdown to get there because of the receiving upside, although I don't think he probably won't be the optimal captain without scoring a touchdown, but I think that's certainly possible. And $10,000, $800 cheaper than Dalvin Cook, should see similar volume. Won't be as efficient, more than likely, but I do like Najee quite a bit on this slide. Like I said, the rest of these guys, pretty much complete garbage, although I will say Keen Wang, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he returns kicks for the Minnesota Vikings. And I want to say he's got like 2 return touchdowns this year, so if you just want to hope and pray for a return touchdown, you could do that. I mean, he's at $1,600. I mean, not really fun just counting on a 100-yard kickoff return touchdown, but it is certainly in the cards, and if you want to play the Vikings defense, you could always double dip there. Just a thought, not that that's really something I'm doing, but if you guys want to get crazy, you could certainly do it. So finally moving over to our lineup, I'm only going to just plug in Najee Harris for now. I think he's a fine captain play. I will have plenty of Najee Harris in the captain spot. I also have exposure to Dalvin Cook and probably a little bit of Alexander Madison in case Dalvin Cook does get limited. I mean, we don't really have any news on that yet, just that he's expected to play. So for right now, let's just plug in Najee in the flex spot. Then we'll talk about wide receivers because there's definitely several good wide receiver plays on this slate. And moving on to the wide receiver position, we'll start with the Minnesota Vikings here first, just because Adam Thielen is out, which definitely creates a bit of an interesting situation for the Vikings wide receiver group. He's averaging around 7 targets per game and over a 20% target share. So when you take that out of the equation, it's definitely a big boost to several of these guys. Justin Jefferson up top at $11,000. We have KJ Osborne starting in the wide receiver 2 role at $5,600. Then you have D.D. Westbrook at $2,200. Then we have a bunch of cheap options here, and by a bunch I mean just a couple in Smith Marset here, who hasn't played a game in a while, but maybe he'll get some snaps this week, $200. Then we have Dan Chisnia, $200, who got some snaps last week. I think it was less than 10%, so it wasn't anything crazy, but I really think it's just going to be like a 3-man show here of D.D. Westbrook, Osborne, and Justin Jefferson for the most part, with Justin Jefferson just being the absolute main guy. I don't think that anyone can argue that. The guy's an absolute stud. I know he's only in the 2nd year, but the guy's just an absolute phenomenal wide receiver. So looking at the numbers so far this season, we have 9 targets per game for Jefferson and 26% target share and nearly 45% market share of the team's air yards. KJ Osborne averaging 4 targets per game and 12.5% target share. But again, last week with no Adam Thielen, he played on over 90% of these snaps, so he's going to slide to that wide receiver 2 role, and you have to assume those targets are definitely going to get bumped up. I would not be surprised if we see anywhere from like 6 to 10 targets from KJ Osborne tonight, depending on game flow. D.D. Westbrook, $2,200, would definitely get a boost in snaps. Played on nearly half of them last week. He'll definitely have a role tonight, so I don't think he's a bad play. $2,200 by any means. And then these guys, I mean, they might be involved, but definitely hard to figure out what their playing time is going to be. We'll have to see if even Smith Marset is active on the slate, but I mean, Jefferson's one of the top captain options on the entire slate. He's my highest projected player. If I can jam in the captain spot as much as possible, I would feel really good about that because I just don't see how anyone's going to stop him on this defense. 25th DV versus the pass, despite allowing the 9th fewest points per game in the wide receiver position, but Don't care about matchups with Jefferson. He has a stud, and Kirk Cousins has no choice really but to get him the ball, especially with no Adam Thielen. Moving on to the Steelers here. It's kind of like a one-man show with Deontay Johnson at $10,200. There's other receivers like Chase Claypool, James Washington, Ray McLeod, and a couple other guys, but they didn't really see significant snaps. But Deontay Johnson is the guy that you want in this offense. Like the Steelers are kind of easy. You know where the ball is going. It's going to Najee, or it's going to Deontay, or maybe Moose getting a few targets out there as well. But for the most part, Deontay has been one of the better wide receivers in fantasy this season. He's very consistent, averaging 83 receiving yards per game, over 10 targets per game. It seems like he gets 12, 13 plus targets every single week. 30% target share, 40% market share of the team's air yards, had 33 fantasy points. Last week, the Vikings are not a good defense versus wide receivers, 27th versus the position, allowing close to 180 receiving yards per game. So I love Deontay tonight. I think he's one of the best plays in the slate. I think he's a phenomenal captain play, especially if you think the Steelers are going to be trailing this game. And they're going to have to throw. I mean, Deontay Johnson, he's going to get you those 10-plus targets. So loving him on this slate. The other guys, Chase Claypool, $7,400. He's always a boomer bust play. He's always an air yards guy. It's just a matter of connecting on those air yards because, I mean, those air yards are coming from Big Ben. So, I mean, it's not like it's coming from, a top-tier quarterback like Tom Brady or whoever it may be. Targets per game at $7,400 definitely has some value. James Washington, 2.6 targets per game with only a 6.9% target share. Not super enticing. Ray McLeod played on nearly 70% of the snaps last week, just under 3 targets per game, but that is kind of boosted from the one game where he had 10-plus targets. He's never came close to that in any other game, so a bit of an anomaly there, but it's really just Deontay and then a little bit of Claypool for the most part. So moving over to our lineup, like I said, wide receiver is kind of loaded on this slate, so I might try to get as many in as possible. I'm not sure if this will be the highest correlated lineup ever, but we'll see what fits here. So again, I'm not making these lineups for you guys to play. I'm just trying to see what fits as we talk through the slate anyway. So Justin Jefferson, like I said, love him in the captain spot. I'm going to try to make it work. I know he's super expensive, but he's the obvious captain play. But we're just going to see what can fit with Justin Jefferson there. So plugged him in, and then I like Deontay Johnson a ton, obviously. I like Chase Claypool, not a ton, but I do like him just because everyone's going to be on Deontay. I'm not sure exactly how high on Claypool is going to be. I have to check my ownership projections, but it's a good spot versus Minnesota secondary. There's no denying that. If he can hit on a couple deep balls, yeah, Claypool would definitely be a pretty darn good term play on the slate, and he's fairly priced at that price point. But I'm going to try to jam in Deontay. We have 3 super expensive guys. These are kind of like my big 3 tonight, Jefferson, Harris, and Deontay. I think they're definitely the 3 best plays on the slate. Now, at this point, we could either, well, we haven't really talked about tight ends yet, so I'm going to refrain from putting one of these 2 in. But KJ Osborne, $5,600. He played over 90% of the snaps last week, and he's definitely going to see a decent amount of work in this game. I mean, he did have 7 targets in that game, 4 catches versus Detroit, 14.7 points, got into the end zone. Not saying he's a lot to score in this game, but I love Jefferson, obviously, but the defensive attention will be on Jefferson. He can handle that, but KJ Osborne will definitely get some softer coverage here, so let's just jam him in. So now we have like 3 receivers and Angie Harris, and we're left with $3,850 left for the last 2 spots, which it's definitely kind of rough. I would like to, with Jefferson at quarterback, I'd like to be able to get Kirk Cousins in, so I'll have to play around with it a little bit more. Maybe we have to drop a guy like Deontay or Angie Harris at the end, but I mean, it's definitely doable. And if we go with like another cheap option plus a kicker, it's certainly a viable looking lineup. And moving on to the tight end position, we'll start with the Pittsburgh Steelers here first, which is a 2-man show of Muth, and it's really just a 1-man show. Generally doesn't really get that involved in the passing game, but he did play 50% of the snaps last week, $2,600. Only seeing a target per game this year, though. Muth, he is the main guy. I mean, averaging 5 targets per game, which recently has definitely gotten up from the first half of the season. But Muth's actually a very good tight end, and he has looked good in the games that he's played, and Big Ben will certainly look to go his way. I don't really care about matchups too much, but Vikings are kind of just mid-pack versus tight ends. But he's definitely going to be involved. Now, Muth typically has to score a touchdown for him to pay off, but that it's certainly possible. He's averaging half a touchdown per game this year. It's just the wide receivers look a lot better to me. $6,600. I mean, you have to go out of your way to play Muth because you're probably not going to be left with $6,600 left in your lineup just sitting there, depending on most builds. But I do think Muth is a good tournament play. Just in cash games, I'm probably not going there at nearly $7,000. Gentry, again, like he's okay, but I wish he was a little bit cheaper. Moving on to the Vikings, we have Tyler Conklin at $6,200, and then Chris Herndon and Luke Stalker will maybe like 10 to 20% of the snaps. But with no Adam Thielen, I think that's definitely a big boost for Conklin around the red zone because Adam Thielen's a touchdown scoring machine, and when you take him out of the equation, Tyler Conklin's a guy that Kirk Cousins could certainly look his way around the red zone. Now, the Steelers have been stingy versus tight ends this year, but again, don't really care about matchups too much, but I do think Conklin is definitely a decent play. For a tight end, he actually gets decent targets. I was playing on my main slates for a couple weeks until I just kind of fell out my lineup builds, but I mean, 15% target share on the season, 10.6% market share. It's not pretty, but I think it's fine, especially he was a little bit cheaper. They did kind of price him up a little bit, I assume, with no Adam Thielen, but I think he's a fine term to play at that price point. And as far as the defenses go, you guys know my stances on defense. I'm typically even to the field or way underweight, and usually I am way underweight, and I do not put them in the captain spot. There happens to be defensive touchdowns, whatever, I'll take the L, but those are quite infrequent, and I will more than happily just rather to get leverage on some skill position players than waste my time playing a defense in the captain spot. Plus, both these defenses are kind of priced up at $4,200 and $4,400, and I think this game could be decently high scoring. Good conditions, obviously, in the dome, and I mean, there's just got good offensive pieces on both sides. Now, the quarterback situations are kind of rough on both, more so the Steelers and the Vikings. Not much of the defenses on this slate. But for the kickers, I do like the kickers. Again, we're in a dome, which does help the kickers out. Control conditions, and both these guys I think are very good plays. Greg Joseph, $4,000, the one I prefer, just because of the higher implied team total, which should lead to more scoring opportunities. Chris Boswell as well is a very good kicker, $3,800. I mean, they're both going to grade out well in projections, so definitely think both these kickers are in play, and I don't mind being even to the field or maybe slightly overweight on them. Not really in the captain spot, maybe 1 to 2% max, but I will definitely play my fair share of both these kickers on this slate. And as I always said, they're better cash game plays than tournament plays, but I'll have exposure in both. They have high floors but low ceilings typically. Then just trying to finish off this lineup again, guys. I'm not recommending to play this. I just want to see what fits as we talk through it. So, like I mentioned, I like the kickers on this slate. I will just plug in Joseph for right now, $4,000. That leaves us $3,700 left. We are just missing out on Boswell, which really sucks because if we could fit in both kickers, actually, I wouldn't mind that. But we're left with McLeod, Gentry, D.D. Westbrook. I think that's fine. If you wanted to go with Westbrook instead of a kicker, I mean, you could obviously play that, leave money on the table. I think that's fine, but you could play James Washington in this lineup. If you wanted to correlate your lineup more and maybe just jam in Kirk Cousins with Jefferson in your captain spot, because for Jefferson to have a good game, I mean, Kirk Cousins is probably going to have to put up a decent score as well. So if you went that route, left at $3,650 just for the more correlation here, then we can maybe plug in Boswell, $3,500 left. You're left with McLeod again. So a couple ways you can go. Obviously, if you want to go Deontay in the captain spot and you wanted to jam in Big Ben in the flex spot, you can do that as well. But use your own judgment, make your own lineups, and it's actually a fun slate to make lineups because there's a lot of good plays now. It doesn't make it easy if you're playing single entry, but if you're building multiple lineups, definitely makes it for a fun one. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it. I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already, and if you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Cheat sheets, optimizers, ownership projections, all that fun stuff, link can be found down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new, sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be it. I'll get out of here, and I wish you guys the best of luck tonight. And I'll see you tomorrow for the final picks video.